whispering walls. The Millers were thrilled when they moved into their new home. It was everything they had dreamed of. A 2-story house with a charming picket fence, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. For weeks, life was perfect. That is, until the Whispers began. At first it was Laura, their 8-year-old daughter, who noticed. She'd lie in bed at night and hear faint murmurs coming from the walls. Thinking it was her parents talking downstairs, she didn't think much of it. But soon, the Whispers began addressing her directly. Laura didn't finish her homework today, the voice sighed one night. Startled, Laura sat up in bed. She told her parents, but they dismissed it as a vivid imagination. Then Sarah, the mother, started hearing it. One evening while washing dishes, the walls whispered to her, "Sarah spent too much money at the store." Her hands froze mid-rinse. She told Jack, her husband, but he waved it off as stress from the move. It wasn't long before Jack heard it too. One night, as he worked in the garage, the walls spoke. Jack is hiding something from his family. His heart raced, and he stormed inside to confront Sarah, thinking she had planted some kind of device. But Sarah was pale and shaken. She had just heard the walls accuse her of a secret she thought no one knew. The little spoke. Definitely. The whispers grew louder and more menacing each night. They revealed the darkest secrets of each family member, things they hadn't even admitted to themselves. Laura became withdrawn, crying herself to sleep. Sarah's anxiety spiraled out of control. And Jack began drinking heavily to cope. Desperate to escape, the Millers decided to sell the house. But when prospective buyers came to view the property, the whispers turned into mocking laughter. "They won't buy this house," the walls taunted. And they were right. Every buyer left, unnerved but unable to explain why. Trapped and unraveling, the Millers tried to ignore the whispers, but the house wouldn't let them. One night, the whispers turned into screams. "You cannot leave. This is your home now." The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, closing in around them. The family huddled together, terrified, as the house shook with anger. The next morning, the whispers stopped. The house was eerily silent, but the Millers knew better than to relax. They remain in the house to this day, trapped by secrets too dangerous to face and too terrifying to flee. And every so often, late at night, the walls begin to whisper once more. The playground's shadow child. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when a group of friends, Sam, Lucy, and Ben, stumbled upon an old, abandoned playground deep in the woods. The swing swayed in the wind, and the slide glistened with frost. Despite its eerie appearance, the children couldn't resist exploring. "Look at this place," Sam said, kicking at the leaves piled under the seesaw. "It's like no one's been here for years." As they played, Lucy noticed something strange. "Guys, look at that shadow," she said, pointing to the ground. A dark silhouette stretched across the playground, but it didn't belong to any of them. She moved slowly, closer and closer. Then it belonged to Salve. "John," she said, pointing to the ground. The dark outline of the shadow. The shadow was shaped like a child. At first it mimicked their movements, jumping when they jumped, sitting when they sat. They laughed nervously, thinking it was some trick of the light. But then the shadow began moving on its own. "Did you see that?" Ben whispered, his voice shaking. The shadow darted from the swing set to the monkey bars, faster than any of them could move. It crouched there, watching. Maybe it just wants to play, Sam joked, though his smile was forced. The others didn't laugh. The shadow crept closer, stretching long and thin until it loomed over them. "Let's go," Lucy said, grabbing Ben's arm. They started running, but Sam tripped over a root and fell hard. The shadow pounced, enveloping him like a black fog. He screamed as his body went limp. "Speak again." Lucy and Ben turned back, but Sam was gone. Only his shoes remained, lying on the ground. The shadow, now smaller, climbed onto the swing and began swaying gently. Terrified, they ran all the way home. When they told their parents, no one believed them. The playground didn't exist on any map, and when they returned with help, it was gone. To this day, Lucy swears she can still hear the creak of the swings at night, and she never sets foot in the woods again. The Haunting of Room 406. When Alina checked into the old Bellwood Inn, she was immediately drawn to the strange atmosphere. The building, a relic of the 19th century, exuded charm and unease in equal measure. She was assigned room 406, a quaint but outdated suite with creaky floorboards and dim lighting. The receptionist, a frail elderly woman, had hesitated for a moment before handing Alina the key. Miss Heath cracked off the key and ringing it on the knife. "If you need anything, just call the front desk," she said, avoiding eye contact. Elena brushed it off as small-town quirks and made her way upstairs. The room was simple, with antique furniture and a faint smell of mothballs. As she unpacked, she noticed a painting above the bed, a portrait of a stern-looking man in a dark suit. His piercing eyes seemed to follow her wherever she moved. Unnerved, Elena decided to cover the painting with a towel. That night, she was jolted awake by a loud thud. She turned on the bedside lamp and froze. The towel had fallen to the floor, and the man in the painting was glaring directly at her, his lips curled into a faint smirk. Her heart raced as she stared at the portrait, but she convinced herself it was just her imagination. Noticing that painting, the sight of the drunken saint, he lay back down, but the sense of being watched grew unbearable. When she returned to bed, the whispers grew louder. "Leave," they hissed. Her breath caught in her throat as the room grew icy cold. The light flickered, and the painting fell off the wall with a crash. Panic set in. Elena grabbed her belongings and bolted to the front desk, where the receptionist was waiting, as if expecting her. "Room 406 doesn't like guests staying too long," the woman said, cryptically. Elena didn't wait for an explanation. She checked out immediately and drove through the night. Years later, she learned that room 406 had been the site of a gruesome murder decades ago. The victim's spirit, it seemed, never left the midnight road. Jake was an experienced truck driver, used to the long, lonely stretches of highway that kept him on the road late into the night. But one particular route, a narrow, winding road through dense forest, always gave him an uneasy feeling. Locals called it Midnight Road, and Jake was about to find out why. It was close to 2 a.m. when he found himself on the infamous stretch. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches clawing at the night sky. His radio crackled with static, and the headlights barely cut through the thick mist rolling across the pavement. As he rounded a bend, he saw a figure standing by the roadside. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white dress, her hair disheveled and her face pale as moonlight. Jake slowed down, hesitant. Hitchhikers were rare on this road, especially at this hour. He rolled down the window. "You need a ride?" he called out. The woman nodded silently, her eyes hollow and distant. Against his better judgment, Jake unlocked the door, and she climbed into the passenger seat without a word. For a while, they drove in silence. Jake couldn't shake the chill that seemed to emanate from her. Her presence felt wrong, as if the air itself grew heavier around her. "Where are you headed?" he finally asked. "Home," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't elaborate, and Jake decided not to press her. As they continued, Jake noticed something odd. The dashboard clock, his wristwatch, even the GPS. All the devices had stopped working. The forest seemed endless, and no matter how far he drove, the road never changed. He glanced up at Jezebel, and she glanced up at him, and she glanced. Then she spoke again, her voice cold and emotionless. "You shouldn't have picked me up." Jake glanced over, and his blood ran cold. Her eyes were black voids, her skin now gray and cracked like old porcelain. The truck lurched as the engine sputtered. The woman smiled, her mouth stretching impossibly wide. "This road doesn't lead anywhere," she hissed. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Jake slammed on the brakes and leapt out of the truck. When he turned back, the woman was gone, and the truck sat silently in the middle of the road, its engine dead. He ran until he found another car passing by, and the driver took him back to the nearest town. When he returned with help the next day, his truck was gone. Locals told him tales of the Midnight Road, a place where lost souls wandered, forever searching for a way out. Jake never drove that route again, but he still dreams of the woman in white. When the shadows speak. The clock struck midnight, and Mia lay wide awake in her darkened room. She'd always been a light sleeper, but tonight there was an unusual stillness that pressed down on her chest. The faint sound of wind whistling outside her window mixed with the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Then it came, the whisper, barely audible at first. It sounded like a distant breath carried on the wind. Mia, her eyes shot open, her heart pounding. It had come from the far corner of her room, the darkest part, where the shadows seemed to thicken unnaturally. She sat up, clutching her blanket tightly, her gaze locked on the corner. She reached for her bedside lamp, fumbling with the switch, but when the bulb flickered to life, the whisper was gone. Relief washed over her. "It's just my imagination," she muttered, forcing a weak smile. The lamp flickered again, then went out completely. The darkness swallowed the room, more oppressive than before. This time, the whisper came louder. "Mia, come here." She froze. It wasn't her imagination. Instead, she saw it. A figure hunched low, its body twisted unnaturally. Its skin was gray and stretched tight over its bones, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly like dying embers. It smiled, revealing jagged teeth, stained black. Mia screamed, stumbling out of bed and backing toward the door. The creature moved, crawling toward her on all fours, its limbs cracking with each motion. "Don't leave," it hissed, its voice like nails on glass. He turned, fumbling with the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The creature was closer now, its bony hand reaching for her ankle. Desperate, Mia swung her phone, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The light struck the creature, and it shrieked, recoiling as smoke rose from its skeletal frame. Mia didn't waste another second. She threw herself against the door, and this time, it burst open. He fled into the hallway, her bare feet slapping against the cold wooden floor. Behind her, she could hear it crawling, faster than she could run. She darted into the kitchen, grabbing the first weapon she saw, a knife. The creature appeared in the doorway, its smile impossibly wide now. Mia screamed and swung the blade. It connected, but the creature only laughed, its laughter echoing in her ears as everything went black. When Mia woke, she was back in her bed. The lamp worked, the shadows were gone, and the house was silent. But on her nightstand was the knife, its blade coated in something black and foul. It was deadly cold, and the blade spat out blood. "What the shit?" Third. She never heard the whisper again, but every night she checked the shadows, knowing it might one day return.